Location. The location of the various crimes does actually factor into its effectiveness, believe it or not. The idea that William was killing in his own Fazbear restaurants is a ridiculous concept that in reality should have gotten him sent to prison. The saying is something along the lines of like, don't crap where you eat, which some take literally, others take as don't date people you see on a regular basis, and in this scenario I suggest that it should mean don't kill people where you're seen on a regular basis or, you know, constantly because it's your own business, especially if it's the business that like targets kids. And while yes, this doesn't instantly make you guilty, but come on, the first thing that anyone would do in this situation, not even a cop, would be question everyone who was working when whatever had happened, or whoever it was disappeared. And let's be realistic, an incident the likes of the missing children's incident from 1985 would ruin a business permanently. None of this somehow they stay open bullshit, because in the real world they would end up closing permanently because no parent would want to go to a place where 5 kids went missing, especially when no bodies were found, which could maybe help them, but it certainly wouldn't help much. If Afton had any competitors, any at all, right? Even this world's version of Chuck E. Cheese, Afton should have gone there. If he had any competitors, or literally anywhere else, would have made more sense. However, he chose to kill where he eats, and that's probably one of the worst decisions that he could have made. Well, aside from, you know, the killing in the first place. Animatronics. While the animatronics are an entirely other mistake, this time around I want to talk about how stupid it was to hide the bodies in the animatronics. Like, how the f*** did he end up getting away with this? The smell of rotting bodies would already ruin the place, especially when its focus is eating pizza. The heat from the animatronic insides would speed up decomposition, and the animatronics are in front of people every single day. They even started complaining that they were leaking blood and mucus, as well as smelling like death. If this was real, and William getting away with it wasn't important for the plot, he would have been caught instantly. Well, first of all, let's get this out of the way instantly. If FNAF was real, it would be horrible. Just straight up. 5 kids would have gone missing in one of their locations, and the company probably would have closed down. But let's assume that people would still end up going, whether it's because they didn't believe the lies or thought that the government made it up, or because it's their choice, or because they're a YouTuber who wants views. Why are you looking at me like that? Well, assuming that people still went to the restaurant because perhaps maybe they vanished around the area instead of inside the place, what would it be like to live in a real Five Nights at Freddy's? For a kid, it would be pretty awful, but you also wouldn't know it. The world would be dangerous and anyone could be William Afton's next victim, but you wouldn't know that there was a serial killer on the loose with murderous animatronics able to disguise themselves and hide in plain sight that are willing to kill at any moment. But I mean, like, to be fair, that's also like real life, minus the animatronics. For adults, if you have kids, you may be worried. I mean, any parent is always worried about their kids, but if there was a group of kids who went missing in your area, I'm sure that there would at least be a small amount of paranoia. And honestly, it would be reasonable. I mean, I grew up in a house where my father was always worried. So much so that my sister couldn't walk up to her friend's house up the street without him watching to make sure she was okay. And while that would probably be extreme for most parents, if there was a very real threat of kidnapping, I'm sure that there would be a lot of curfews. For the sake of this entire thing, we also have to assume that the police didn't investigate the interiors of the animatronics themselves, despite them smelling like death and leaking body fluids, including blood. Since that's something literally anyone with common sense would check when investigating the disappearance of children and then learning that animatronics are leaking blood and smelling like a dead body. But what of the technology that we see in these games? Would animatronics that can alter their appearance be realistic? No. Of course not. The Springlock suits, the illusion discs, the twisted animatronics, and the like are all extremely improbable considering the actual technology of not only our time, but the 80s when this would have normally taken place. At least, if we have a rough idea of the timeline, which honestly at this point, we could be totally wrong about the timeline. The technology in the games is so highly advanced that we have absolutely no idea what else they could have access to. They could have smartphones in the 80s for crying out loud. And if they don't, then William should have capitalized on that rather than murdering countless innocent kids, because he could have literally been a billionaire. The highly advanced technology would have to be disregarded in terms of the abilities of William Afton. So while this seems like a fight that nobody could really win, realistically, it wouldn't be as bad as we think, at least in those terms, since even Chuck E. Cheese, the closest thing to Freddy Fazbear's in our world, obviously, still only has the most simple robotic abilities known to man, despite the popularity of Five Nights at Freddy's and their ability to capitalize on that trend by taking some of those concepts, like the advanced robotics, not the dead kids, and then converting them into real life. Oh, we never found the bodies of these kids, but now these animatronics are leaking blood and smell like death. Hell, they even make bone-crushing sounds when they move. We should probably check this out. Oh look, turns out we found those missing kids. William Afton, you're under arrest for the murder of Cassidy, Fritz, Jeremy, Gabriel, Susie. Boom! Instantly. I don't know how this wasn't an open and shut case. Straight up, William was so goddamn stupid that he shouldn't have made it to the first game. Not to mention how stupid he was by building the Funtime animatronics with these item containment chambers, as he was calling it, since the cops ended up questioning him about why he made those design choices in the sister location opening scene. Plus, he superpowered the jaw of Fredbear from Fredbear's Family Diner to end up giving it a jaw that accidentally killed his son. Absolute moron. William, not the son. It wasn't his fault that he got his head shoved in there. If he had put it in there himself, it would have been his fault, but he didn't. Enemies. Now, while William did choose a set of easy marks, since, you know, kids can't really defend themselves against a dude in a part animatronic furry suit, but he's a moron for exclusively killing that demographic only. I don't know why he did that. Sure, it's easier on him, especially when he's fully combined with an animatronic, but Henry serves as the opposition to William, and the reason William ends up burning multiple times. It's not Henry's fault that he turned into Springtrap, but it's certainly his fault that he turned into Scrap Trap, since this is most likely due to the FNAF 3 fire, and the FNAF 6 fire turned him into Burn Trap. So Henry has definitely been a pain in William's side for ages. Killing Henry would have resulted in nobody being able to chase William, basically. Like, Michael might have figured it out, but he wouldn't really be in a position to do anything without Henry. Henry gave him the FNAF 3 job, probably, and definitely gave him the FNAF 6 job, so if William had just offed Henry after offing his daughter, he would have had a much easier time. At least, I'd think so. That's why every comic villain wants to kill the hero, right? Because if they do, they'll have a much easier time committing all their various crimes. So how is this any different? It shouldn't be. William is an absolute buffoon for not killing Henry when he had the chance. I'm sure it was Henry reporting him to the cops, like, you killed this man's daughter. Of course he's gonna have some form of vendetta against your ass. He's coming for blood, and he actively tries to kill you multiple times. That's not something that you should have just ignored. You should have just killed Henry after his daughter, because honestly it makes sense. Then you kill his wife, or the mother of Charlotte, as long as she's in the picture, knows about it, and actually cares, because sometimes they don't. But mom's gonna go after anyone who wronged their child, okay? Oh, that's something to witness, I'm telling you. Even my mom is vicious as hell, and she's like the sweetest woman in the world. So, you just get rid of the family, alright? Especially when it's your business partner. God, you're stupid.
Number 10, William Afton and the leak. Probably one of the most iconic when it comes to Springlock failures is William Afton. William Afton from the games, that is. In this version of the story, William Afton basically got destroyed by these Springlocks. He was fully impaled by the Springlocks in the Springlock Bonnie suit after trying to escape the ghosts of his victims. He thought hiding inside the Spring Bonnie suit would protect him, but hey, he was wrong. It turned out that there was water on the floor which, when he touched, caused the spring locks in the suit to loosen, or water that possibly dripped down from him, and also his breath. This caused the spring locks to malfunction, they fully released and impaled William, ultimately causing his death. However, this is William Afton, so even dying would not keep him dead forever. It would only keep him dead for a little while. We later learned that one of the vengeful spirits, or possibly a pair of them, cursed William to experience the pain that they had felt, thereby extending his life indefinitely, no matter the pain he suffered. Which is how William Afton can be a shambling corpse, but also somehow still alive. And friends, before I move on to this next spot on the list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Gaming, and if you love FNAF 2, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Can you springlock a ghost? To answer this question, we could turn to the Fazbear Frights book 135 AM, and one of the stories within its pages, titled The New Kid. In this story, a young boy named Devin befriends the new kid at school, Kelsey. However, while his other friend Mick seems to really like Kelsey, and at first, Devin does too, eventually Devin becomes jealous of Kelsey. When Kelsey seemingly ditches them one day when they're all hanging out, Devin decides to get revenge on him for doing this. Finding a new hangout spot, a now abandoned former Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, Devin dares Kelsey to put on a springlock suit. Kelsey does this and begins dancing around, but doing so, of course, triggers the spring locks within the suit to release, seemingly impaling him. While initially Devin and Mick leave Kelsey there for dead, Devin eventually returns to investigate, with Mick wondering if Kelsey might still be alive. When Devin does return, he doesn't see Kelsey in the suit, but later spots a black-haired ghostly figure within. It is implied that Kelsey is some kind of spirit of vengeance, possibly one of the spirits from the game lore that possessed Golden Freddy. And if you're wondering how we know that, well, later in the book we see that Kelsey is alive and well, seemingly, after he seemed to have been springlocked, so either he has superpowers or he a ghost. Number 7. The Amazing Escape. William Afton in the books is much more lucky, or perhaps just more brilliant, than his video game counterpart, at least when it comes to dodging spring locks somehow. Like in the games, he ends up getting spring locked, but instead of being killed by this experience, he miraculously survives, seeming to somehow pull a Harry Houdini and just escape that. While Charlie activates the spring locks in the suit he's wearing at the end of the novel Five Nights at Freddy's The Silver Eyes, we learn in the next book, The Twisted Ones, that the blood found at the scene ends up being analyzed in a lab and found to be fake blood. Finally, in the fourth closet, it is confirmed that William Afton, while harmed, miraculously survived being spring locked. I don't know how this is possible, but it's a thing that happened. Pretty impressive considering in most other cases, it's pretty much a death sentence.
And at 7, Henry Emily. Now this is certainly an interesting case, because seemingly Henry has died multiple ways across FNAF canons, with his first apparent death being in FNAF World at the hands of Baby. His death in the novels seems to have happened before the Silver Eyes starts, and then he dies in FNAF 6 along with everything else. But could one of these deaths involve a springlock failure or something having to do with springlocks? I mean, maybe Afton offed Henry in one of these realities, finally actually, took care of his worst enemy, or maybe Baby has some springlock mechanisms that's inside of her that she used to kill Henry. I mean, hell, maybe Henry just climbed into the wrong suit at the wrong time, or maybe the right suit at the right time for him. It's a question that we don't really pay attention to because, I mean, Henry's death doesn't mean much to the story, unfortunately. I mean, it's true, it doesn't. Henry dying doesn't really mean much overall for the FNAF lore, okay? We didn't even know that he was alive until FNAF 6, for God's sakes. So maybe, for irony's sake, Scott had him bite the dust in a quicker way rather than just burning him alive. And at 6, Phone Guy. Phone Guy's death is one of the most mysterious deaths of all time, okay? We hear him die in FNAF 1 on night 4 with the sounds of multiple animatronics banging at his doors, but we never really get an explanation as to what happens to him. We know that he dies, but other than that, it's all speculation. One of the theories is that the animatronics got him and shoved him into a suit, resulting in a painful death, especially since at this point the springlock suits were either still in operation or hadn't been totally removed. The actual timeline of events for the springlock suits is a little messy since we don't really have the exact years for the things getting scrapped, yet it's still possible that Phone Guy was shoved into one, or maybe he tried to use it to hide. After all, maybe Phone Guy is secretly William Afton and Scott just doesn't want us to know that yet or something, and what we hear could just be the FNAF 3 cutscene. I mean, I doubt it, but it would be absolutely hilarious if he ended up pulling that on us, okay? And for all those saying that Phone Guy can't be Afton because Afton is British or whatever, so is Tom Holland. Holland, okay? It's called acting. You can fake an accent, especially if you're a serial killer who's trying to evade everything, you know? Kinda, yeah, it's a thing. Halfway through at number 5, Crying Child. Okay, now this one is certainly going to get at least a little controversial, but there is no way that I could do this list without mentioning one of the greatest debates of my Instagram DMs ever. The amount of people who message me on Instagram not asking about literally anything else aside from the bite of 83 and how it had to have been the Springlocks kind of bothers me, and it does so to my core, okay? I say it every time that I brought it up, but it couldn't have been a Springlock failure. That being said though, if it is possible, that's kind of what this list is talking about, mysteries, who knows? The reason I don't think it was a Springlock failure is because the Fredbear suit was already in animatronic mode, meaning that no Springlocks would have had the chance to fail, since keeping in mind a Springlock failure refers to the Springlock mechanisms used to move the robotic parts failing, meaning that all the actual like endoskeleton bits snap back into where they should have been, and that's why if someone's inside, that's a bad thing, you know, because you don't want to really be sharing your bone bits with metal bits, and there also would have been no Springlock mechanisms inside the mouth because there's no robotic bits between the jaws. But again, that's the whole thing. The jaw just moves up and down. But still, it's a possibility since logic and physics doesn't really seem to apply to the FNAF world, which is made evident by those goddamn doors from FNAF 1. Even if they're supposed to be electromagnets, they would only open with power. I'm just saying, okay? Maybe Scott intended it to be a Springlock failure, but he just showed it in literally the worst way possible. I don't know.
Number 3, Payback. Going back to the Fazbear Fright story, the new kid from the 1:35 a.m. book, Kelsey, wasn't the only one to get Springlocked in the story. When Devin returns to the abandoned Freddy's to see if Kelsey might still be alive, he notices the suit is empty. He thinks he sees something further inside, and so he decides to reach into the mouth of the suit, only for the suit to seemingly clamp down on his arm. Of course, you should never do that. If you see something and you're like, oh, maybe I'll put my arm in this thing where my arm could get stuck, don't do it. The more he struggles, the more he seems to get sucked into the suit. Sure, this isn't so much a Springlock failure from the inside, you know, and no one's wearing the suit in some of these. It's more reminiscent of the bite of 83, because I don't think there was anyone in that suit. But this is still a Springlock suit failing. So, while different, I still consider it to be a failure with consequences. Consequences being, you know, Devin also likely died. Number 2, the bite of 83. Definitely among the most memorable Springlock failures is the bite of 83. Now some of you are gonna say, Amanda, this is not a Springlock failure. There was no one in that suit that we know of, which sure. But still, it's a Springlock suit and it failed, so I'm counting it. Anyways, I feel like the bite of 83 hasn't been fully confirmed really at all, but many theorize it to be true. Many theorize that our theory is true, that we have so far, because this is all we got, alright? We grab all these little Easter eggs and then we do our best to try to figure out what's going on in the narrative. Now, why do we believe that this could even be a Springlock failure? Well, one, the crying child was crying when he was held up to give Fredbear a kiss, which many theorize is the reason the jaws of the animatronic bear clamped down, as a result of the tears making the gears wet and causing a Springlock malfunction. 2, we have been led to believe that Fredbear was a Springlock suit, so that's also why people suspect that the bite of 83 could also be a Springlock malfunction. Number 1, multiple. While Shadow Freddy and RWQFS-FASXC may have been debunked as Springlock failure victims by Scott himself, this theory didn't come out of nowhere. In fact, many thought that they were among those generally referred to in FNAF 3 during Phone Guy's recording for night number 4. Here, Phone Guy mentions that the Springlock suits are being discontinued as a result of an unfortunate incident at the sister location involving multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures. Which, I gotta say, it makes sense to me too, because I'm like, what were all these multiple Springlock failures? What does that entail, and how many were there? Oh boy.
And at 10, moisture sensitive. One of the things that I find to be the absolute dumbest thing about not only these damned suits but also the FNAF series in general is how stupid it is that the Springlock mechanisms inside the Springlock suits fail with moisture. Sure, it explains why William gets Springlocked because the room was dripping and whatever, the ceiling was leaking, and it makes everyone confused with Crying Child because he was crying. Despite that not being a Springlock failure, everyone thought it was because he was crying and, you know, moisture. But in actual practice, that is a horribly flawed mechanic. Like, if me breathing and sweating is going to make the metal bits snap on me, why would I do it in a hot robotic suit? That seems like a horrible and stupid idea. Like, yes, okay, put me in a hot and sweaty environment that gets me killed if it gets wet. That's not a liability at all. I get sweaty wearing my freaking Doctor Strange costume, okay? Imagine a giant suit full of metal, okay? That would also be heavy as hell to walk around in too, only making the sweating worse. In a 9 designer. You see, there are a decent amount of people that for some reason think that these Springlock suits were made with pure intentions. By William Afton. This kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that William started killing after losing his kids, but we know that that's not the case. Since thanks to the fast facts found in FNAF AR's files, we know that the Funtime animatronics were some of the first ones ever made, and considering the abilities of Baby and her comrades, we know that they were made in order to kill, meaning that even if the Springlock animatronics were the very first animatronics ever, it's reasonable to assume that they were also designed with death in mind, which explains multiple things. But honestly, if William made the Funtimes with death in mind, it's likely that he did the same with the Springlocks, you get me? And if you think that a suit that can snap at a moment's notice and shove pounds of metal, bars, cogs, gears, and chains and more into the same space as your body would be made with pure intentions, you should stop watching these videos and go to a therapist. Seriously. I have a number. In at 8, no bonus. The Springlock mechanism is probably the most intuitive thing that FNAF's world invented. The ability to move robotic parts out of the way enough for a human to fit inside is nuts. And while it may be dangerous, we also drive over 100 kilometers or miles, whatever, per hour in huge metal death boxes, so we can't necessarily complain about it. And while yes, they have their faults, there is nothing compared to the ability to be both animatronic and suit. That's an incredible feat of technology, and I'm sure they play into it with the marketing. Like, I mean, we hear the Foam Guy tapes from FNAF 3 talking about these things, okay? And he never mentions a bonus or anything like that for you risking your life with one of these damn suits. And even if you end up getting Springlocked, there doesn't really seem to be any compensation package for your loved ones. Hell, if you die, you may not even get your severance. Actually, maybe that's why they do it. Your family can file a lawsuit since, you know, you died on the job, but that's a lengthy court battle against a massive company with a serial killer who has yet to be caught at the front lines. It's not really gonna do much good for your fam. So the fact that you don't get a bonus if you get in one of these suits, let alone get Springlocked, no thanks. It's a red flag. Swipe left.
Number 6. Triggered by wriggling off mini arenas. This is probably my favorite consequence when it comes to the Springlocks malfunctioning. Likely because you yourself actually get to experience failure in a way. But obviously not in real life because that would be awful and horrible and extremely painful. Instead, you experience it in game. So although you can't feel it, you can't imagine what it would feel like, which honestly is also terrifying to do. This time when the Springlocks fail, it is as a result of your movement. You are the one who must wriggle to shake off the mini arenas, which are climbing up the suit and attempting to kinda climb into it with you. If this happens enough times, the mini arena's jump scare will get triggered, implying your death by mini arenas. However, if you also wriggle too much to keep them off you, without winding the Springlocks back up enough, you will trigger the Springlocks release, which will also result in your death by being impaled by suit parts, which are released by those Springlocks. Yikes. Number 5. The fate of Shadow Freddy. Shadow Freddy is thought by some, in regards to lore, to have been a possible Springlock victim. The consequences of this employee's Springlock failure would be, of course, that they died. That's right, people believe that Shadow Freddy, who appears to be somewhat ghostly in nature, is actually the spirit of a former Freddy's employee, who died while wearing a Springlock Freddy suit. It's believed that for one reason or another, the suit malfunctioned, murdering its wearer. As a result, Shadow Freddy was born to haunt its former workplace, and was also likely one of the reasons that Springlock suits stopped being used, at least temporarily. Although apparently not soon enough, as there were other failures that occurred possibly even after this one. Number 4. The fate of RWQFSFASXC. Some believe that not only is Shadow Freddy a victim of the Springlocks failing, but so is the shadowy figure of RWQFSFASXC. They believe that this shadowy Bonnie was another employee who, instead of being killed by the Springlock Freddy suit, met their end while inside the Springlock Bonnie suit, which also failed. My question is, if these employees happen to both die as a result of wearing and using the Springlock suits and the suits malfunctioning, did they die on the same day? Because if not, why would you ever continue to use these suits as a company? And why would you ever, as an employee, agree to get in another one? Unless one of them was hired after the other one and like no one told them about what happened to the last person to put on one of those suits. Still, legal liability right there. Like, my alarms are going off for like lawsuits. Of course, this was only a theory anyways, and actually one that Scott claimed was incorrect in regards to the true origins of both Shadow Freddy and RWQFSFASXC.
Paperwork. One of the worst things for the survivors after a Springlock failure has to be the paperwork that is associated with it, because goddamn. Someone dying in your building is one thing. Someone dying in your building because of something in your building is another, and then add on to that the fact that they were your employee and probably forced into that suit without because of their contract, and you'll be filing reports until you have to retire. Okay, especially because one mistake on those papers means like even more paperwork, and I don't really know anyone who likes to do paperwork. Personally, I hate it, but that's also because my ADHD makes me it makes it unbearable for me, honestly. Like, it's even tough to write scripts sometimes, but I mean, eventually I have to, but like that's where my brain thrives, you know, in that stressful environment, which is not good for my health. But if it was that kind of paperwork, I would honestly just quit, because there was no way in hell that I would even want to attempt to keep my focus on that when I can just scroll through TikTok or YouTube instead. So yeah, no thanks. But ultimately, in at number 2, replaced. Oh yeah, don't forget your bones being replaced with metal ones. Yeah, like sure, there's surgery for people who need repairs or replacements, okay? I think like hip replacements are probably the most common actually. However, those have whole processes behind them to ensure a fast recovery and, you know, survival, not being infected. All of a sudden being shoved full of metal bones where normal ones used to be, that's a guaranteed infection at the very least, especially considering how, you know, your normal bones have to go somewhere else. And whether they're just crushed and then spread out inside you or just pushed out the other side, you're going to be in a hell of a lot of pain. Plus, you know, probably not alive, which I guess is a good thing, since you won't really have to deal with the intense pain for too long, hopefully. But this actually makes me think, if you replace all of your bones with metal ones, are you still you? Is this like a Ship of Theseus moment? Am I about to have like a WandaVision finale? Or like, are we just our brain? And if we are our brain, does that mean that if we have a brain transplant, do we become another person despite it still being my body? And does that mean that we're just like a brain piloting a bone mech with meat armor? Oh no, existential crisis. And finally, in at number 1, death. I mean, don't get me wrong, okay? But the worst thing about a Springlock failure has to be the whole death part, right? Ignore my mumbling. I mean, honestly, okay, it's obviously not for some of you, given the whole comments thing earlier, but the only reason you wouldn't die in a Springlock suit is because you're a main character and need to be around for the story. And then you're just in agonizing pain for the rest of your life. Yeah, the only people who have survived a Springlock failure, well, confirmed, is William. So, yeah, and you know, he's like the main antagonist of the game and was only able to survive since the spirit of a victim was keeping him alive. And in the books, William also ended up getting springlocked before, but then got out of the suit, since Dave Miller, who is revealed to be William, has scars from a previous Springlock failure from before he becomes Springtrap in the books. So the only one who can ever really survive seems to be William, and he's survived it twice. Anyone else is boned, and personally, I'd rather not die by having millions of small metal bits and several dozen large ones shoved into my body, trying to replace my body. I would rather die peacefully in my sleep with Chica's hand around my throat. In at 10, Springtrap. I believe we all know this story by now, okay? Everything was going well at first, they couldn't pin him down, and he was on his way to immortality. Once William discovered Remnant, however, he spiraled. He wanted to use it to fuel his life and make him truly immortal. So, in an effort to study it further, William lures the possessed animatronics to a back room that they can't normally access, and then uses it to dismantle them, planning to melt down their endoskeletons to make soul-infused metal. However, by doing this, he unknowingly releases the souls of the victims that he claimed so long ago. And seeing these victims causes William to panic. Understandably, I mean, they're freaking ghost kids and they're also the ghosts of kids that you killed. So, yeah, then this absolutely animatronic genius, the technician that has made the suits, handles the suit maintenance, and explained to every employee the proper procedure for putting these Springlock suits on, climbs into the Spring Bonnie suit that he actually uses to kill, and then climbs inside in such a panic that he actually didn't notice the moisture in the room, the leaking ceiling, and, you know, literally everything else, probably also his sweat, which caused the Springlocks that were active in this moment, since it was in suit mode, to fail. And I feel like that moment is one of the most confusing mysteries. Why did he do that? He knows better. If he can avoid the cops for that long, why did he think that this was all just gonna be fine? Dude. In and on Cassidy. Cassidy is the most mysterious victim in the missing children's incident. Okay, her name was hidden for years, only being revealed in the survival logbook and then confirmed in the FNAF movie script Scott talked about in a post on Reddit. That script though was ultimately scrapped. And honestly, we don't really know much about her. We don't know how she died, and there are plenty of theories that claim to have evidence of her being a Springlock victim. Maybe William knew that would be an easier way than just, I don't know, a knife. I mean, after all, she does possess Golden Freddy, and some figure that he could be a Springlock suit that had the guts removed, hence the slumped over nature in his FNAF 1 and 2 forms. However, if this was the case, and Cassidy's body was in that suit, wouldn't they have found it when they were gutting the animatronic? But maybe, then again, William was the one who gutted it, considering how he was the suit technician. For a suit technician though, he did miss a fatal flaw with the animatronics he literally designed, since he got in the suit when it was wet like we just talked about. But either way, Cassidy being a Springlock victim could be true, but it's still a mystery. At least until Scott acknowledges the idea. Until then, it's just a theory, so don't go around saying that it's fact. It's a mystery. We don't know. And at 8, Kelsey. Kelsey is in essence the main antagonist of the Fazbear Frights story The New Kid from the 3rd Fazbear Frights book 135 AM. Kelsey had just moved to town and ends up becoming friends with the main protagonist, Devin. Devin ends up getting jealous of how much everyone loves Kelsey though, so he hatches a plan with his other friend to trap Kelsey in a Springlock suit for a few hours. However, when they unleash their plan, the Springlock suit fails and kills Kelsey. I mean, if you're going to trap him in a Springlock suit, I mean, isn't that isn't that how you would have trapped him normally? I didn't think you really thought that plan through. But at least they thought it killed him, since a week later, Devin returns to make sure that Kelsey is still in there, only to find a different body in the suit. He knows that it's someone else because the hair color is different. And then Devin gets stuck inside the suit because he reached his arm in and then he bleeds out. Only for the story to cut back to Kelsey meeting 2 more kids at his new school. It is definitely an interesting story because while Kelsey did get Springlock, he ended up being fine. So what really happened? Some think that Kelsey is a ghost, some think that he's supposed to be the one you should not have killed, but no matter what, we all feel like that there's a high possibility that Kelsey was a Springlock victim, or you should have been, but we don't know how and we don't know when, but I mean, it's still a definite possibility, which makes it a mystery. Not really an impactful one though, so in at 8 it goes. And at 7, required. The Springlock suits themselves are an occupational hazard that they didn't really need to create. Like, these things are hella deadly, and both William and Henry allow for their employees to wear them. Like, goddamn, okay? Just make a separate suit for the animatronic characters, for the employees, okay? Like, the people who run your business. You know, they are the ones who make you the money, so, you know, they don't end up dying from robotic parts replacing their internal organs. OSHA would have been all over these goddamn suits if it was real in this universe, but apparently I guess it's not. And honestly, it's probably required by your contract to wear these suits at work, and if you refuse, you're probably gonna get fired, especially considering how they started getting ready to fire Jeremy because he saw Glitch Trap in Help Wanted. So why wouldn't they fire you for not wearing your suit if it's in your contract? Even if you claim it was to protect your life, they'd find another reason that you couldn't really fight against, so. Especially, you know, when a serial killer is the CEO. And at 6, implications. Now, while the term Springlock is used in real life, it's totally different from the actual FNAF mechanism. I'm certain most of you got the whole Springlocks are real line from Springlocks and You, How Not to Die Remastered. It's a thread on the FNAF wiki. However, actual Springlocks are just locks that use springs, okay? From my research, what I gathered is that a Springlock in real life is, in simplest terms, a spring lock. It's like if your front door's deadbolt was on a spring. Every other instance talking about real spring locks or just ends up bringing you back or quotes this page. So it's kind of circular logic, okay? You can't use evidence within the thing that you're trying to prove as proof that it is real. It's like plugging a power bar into itself. It doesn't work. You can't use the same article to prove that Springlocks are real, okay? Because they're not. At least their game form isn't. But if the Springlock failure was real, I think the implications of like all of this being real in general is like one of the worst things. You get it? Like it's definitely in the top 10. Get it? It's a little meta content joke for you because this is a top 10 list. It's in the top 10. Halfway through into number 5, comments. I've mentioned this in previous videos, mostly to explain why there won't ever be an actual real FNAF restaurant that you'll be able to walk into, and it still remains true since we're only getting a virtual diner that you can only order online. However, I think that one of the worst things still, and especially when it comes to these suits, is the goddamn comments about them. You want to know a comment that I saw yesterday? Well, yesterday for me as I was writing this, Wednesday for you. Okay, I saw someone say that they want to be springlocked. What? Why? Why would you want to be springlocked? Do you know how messed up that is? You're saying that you want to be killed by this thing? Because there's some hotlines that you should call. Like, why on sweet heaven's earth would you want to be springlocked? Do you know how absolutely agonizingly painful that would be? That would be one of the worst things imaginable, okay? Holy sweet Lord baby Jesus W. Christ. That would be one of the worst ways to go, if not the worst way. At least like as far as like actually could happen goes, I think at least, okay? Because like a volcano would suck, but it's a bit unrealistic. It's a bad idea, okay? Stop doing this. Stop saying this. Okay, talk to a doctor. And for Afton, I talked about how the implications would apply to like how everything in FNAF would have happened in real life if one of these was real, but one of the worst implications would be that Afton was real. This man has caused me enough pain and suffering already. I don't need him to be like an actual person, especially considering how Springtrap would be set loose next year. And then everything after it would happen. This channel would probably be a true crime channel and not a gaming channel. I'd probably have tried proving it myself and maybe even become a PI so that I can do so. But straight up, this man has already caused me enough grief and suffering and loss and tears of pain at night in my life, and it's made me lose enough of it already to him. So yeah, him being real would just be the worst thing that I can imagine for me. However, that's only if the Springlock failure thing was also real. There are worse things for people in the FNAF universe though, not in real life, such as in at 3. Getting close to the end in number 3, Golden Fredbear. One theory I've seen plenty of times, and I'm pretty sure was mostly the start of FNAF 4 theory, was that Golden Freddy and Fredbear are the same animatronic, suggesting that the reason Golden Freddy is all limp in the original FNAF and FNAF 2 is because his endoskeleton was removed after Crying Child's bite in 1983, and that's why the suit has to teleport around and cause hallucinations, because it can't actually move. This would also probably mean that Crying Child was the one in the Golden Freddy suit. However, we know that this isn't true based on the characters being separate in Ultimate Custom Night and not just coloring and size, since Golden Freddy is much smaller than Fredbear would have been, since, you know, Fredbear would have to accommodate a human and Golden Freddy wouldn't, since he would just be an animatronic and not a Springlock suit. But honestly, at this point, the actual design doesn't really seem to matter, since Springtrap went to Scrap Trap and then to Burn Trap, so honestly, it's all up in the air. However, I have yet to see proper substantial evidence of this being the case, and I don't think that they would have removed the endoskeleton before that. And finally, in at number 1, Double Trouble. Could William have suffered a Springlock failure before getting trapped in the Springlock Bonnie suit that we see in FNAF 3? It is possible, okay, and it certainly appears like this could be the case in the FNAF novels. Well, it is the case in the FNAF novels, but because of that, it could be the case in the games. Since William in the books is described to have scars that are consistent with a Springlock failure before actually becoming Springtrap in the books. So, could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason that the Springlock suits were actually retired? Since we do hear of the unfortunate incident at a sister location, so is that unfortunate incident instead William? There are plenty of people that it could be, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put put out of commission because, you know, he's kind of up there. And I mean, he doesn't really seem to care about anyone else, so if they failed on them, why would he retire them? But with William continuing to use the suit and putting it on after, you know, when like the room was wet in FNAF 3, this could be unlikely unless he just doesn't have the capacity for trauma, but it's still possible either way, okay? So since this list is about mysteries, I feel like this deserves to be on it. And you know what? Be the capstone. Because like the concepts in the actual pizzeria, not having kids go missing, like I said, that's a bad idea. Although based on comments left on previous videos, especially about how a real-life Freddy's would happen, there have been plenty of people that are willing to die, or more likely to go to Chuck E. Cheese if it was more dangerous for some reason. Y'all are weird. But one final query. How would YouTubers handle it? Clearly, there are YouTubers in this world thanks to the mention of MatPat, or at the very least Game Theory in the Fazbear Frights books, so what of the others? Well, we would most likely not be talking about FNAF. Something that I'm sure a lot of you would enjoy, but also something that you wouldn't be aware of, which is a whole other can of worms that I won't be getting into today, because you wouldn't know about FNAF, because FNAF wouldn't be a thing. However, I'm sure that there would be plenty of true crime and conspiracy YouTubers heading to a or the same Freddy Fazbear's where the kids went missing in order to solve the case. Or really just talk about it and get nowhere with it. Sounds like someone I know. Since they don't have the clearance or the equipment to do an actual investigation, or on a potentially closed case. Shane Dawson would 100% have gone there for that same conspiracy theory video, and the psychic twins would definitely have showed up at some point and definitely sensed something, but not quite known what it was. Ooh. MatPat may have made a food theory video about it because he made a food theory video about Chuck E. Cheese, but the thing is, these YouTubers coming to investigate, would they be William's next targets? It's an interesting question because as far as we know, he's only killed one adult, and that was Henry. Every other victim has been a kid, so while they may be in more danger, there would clearly be a bigger issue in trying to deal with these YouTubers, especially if they get killed or die mysteriously shortly after visiting a Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. It would probably start some form of curse rumor that would only get more people to go there to try to solve that case. But how would Freddy's have dealt with the pandemic? Would they have made enough to survive the years of quarantine? Or would they, like our Chuck E. Cheese, have to file for bankruptcy? Would they get to open their Pizzaplex? Or would some problematic tweets from William Afton rise and cause the restaurant to get cancelled for calling Chica a he? These are all good questions that we will never really have an answer for because, well, FNAF isn't real. And that's why people keep commenting that nothing in these videos is scary. No, it's not real. It can't actually hurt you. That's why it's not scary. Scary is subjective. Just relax. And while William may never have been caught for these acts, that's simply because he couldn't get caught or the plot would make no sense. So ultimately, the game had to find an excuse for his ridiculous behavior. But William could have done wonders if he had just been slightly more intelligent and maybe actually thought about things. Killing kids in your own pizzeria is horrible for business, so do that somewhere else, okay? If he had, he wouldn't have hid the bodies in the animatronics, which would have prevented the kids from attaching their souls to the animatronics that they were stuffed into. Thus, William wouldn't have had to disassemble them, which accidentally released their souls, causing him to hide in his Springtrap suit. The Spring bodysuit would have failed without him inside, thus preventing Springtrap from being created, and William wouldn't have been sealed behind a wall for 30 years. During those 30 years, he'd still be possessed by the one you should not have killed, since they didn't latch onto an animatronic in the first place, they latched onto him, and he'd be unable to properly die still, but he'd have an extra 30 years to work on bringing his kid back to life. He wouldn't have needed to send Michael to get Baby from Afton Robotics' storage facility, and Michael would have ended up fine. Fazbear Frights wouldn't have opened, resulting in the place never burning down, and the FNAF 6 game wouldn't have needed to take place. There would have been no need to repair the company image in FNAF VR. William would have been probably a millionaire, and he could have used that money to study ways to bring his son back. perhaps discovering Remnant along the way, similar to how Henry created the Ella doll in the novels. William could have poured his grief into something, watched it become possessed, and then worked on recreating that in a robot version of his dead children. If his children even died anyway. Since Fazbear's wouldn't have closed, he wouldn't have needed to open Circus Babies, resulting in Elizabeth staying alive. And since Crying Child wouldn't have seen her get scooped, he wouldn't fear the animatronics. Thus Michael not needing to put his head in the Fredbear mouth because he thought it was funny, because his brother was scared. His brother wouldn't have been scared, so Michael wouldn't have needed to do that. William also just wouldn't have supercharged Fredbear's jaw, so even if Crying Child did get his head in there, which again I guess would technically be possible, he still wouldn't have died because of it. All of this simply goes back to William's first mistake, which was choosing to kill people in his own establishment. If that first kill also wasn't his business partner's daughter, nobody would have been suspicious of him and everything would have gone his way. Okay? Afton is smart. However, he could have been a lot smarter at the start, which would have resulted in him having an easy time on his killing spree, but I guess that wouldn't make for a very interesting game series, would it?